Welcome to episode 80 of the AMT podcast. I hope you guys are well. I'm probably past the grace period where I can wish you a happy new year, but I'm going to wish you a good one anyway. It's been a chaotic last couple of weeks, personally and professionally, and I'll delve into why probably in the next episode, where I will be rejoined by Pez. We have a lot of catching up to do. All our previous episodes, if you want to give those a watch, are on the channel. But in this episode, I do want to keep it short and sharp and reflect upon 2025, and I hope you're all looking back on the last year as fondly as I am. And I don't say that with any air of arrogance in case that's perceived the wrong way, but rather because I followed through with what I promised I would do and what I've always been preaching. I didn't pour anywhere near as much effort into finding new edges as I did towards chipping away at old habits that have hindered me. And as a consequence, I traded less markets, I had a higher ROI, and I was as efficient as I've ever been. So it was just another year of steady progression where I was able to mitigate my downside and my workload as well as I've ever done. I'm not going to delve into profits and losses here on this episode, but if you are keen to know the ballpark figure for which I operate at on Betfair, then you can subscribe to my newsletter on Substack, and I'll post the link in the description below. At least once a month, I post a diary update where I journal my trading results and my thoughts and struggles and so forth that many traders can relate to. But essentially, what I want to say today is not so different from what I've always said in the past. And my message to those listening is the same as it's been every new year. And that's the thing about sound advice. No matter how much sense it makes or how well it resonates, people forget, because acknowledging something is far easier than taking action. Sometimes you have to hear the same thing dozens of times. Sometimes you have to mess up repeatedly before it finally hits home. At least it was that way for me. I had a chat with a mate yesterday who's only recently taken a keen interest in what I do, and he's told me he's read up to 15 books on trading. Now, not that there's anything wrong with increasing the breadth of your knowledge, but I've never read a book on trading, and I've actually only read 2 or 3 books on psychology and personal finance, but I've read those books at least 4 or 5 times each. In fact, I still reference them constantly in my newsletters and even in these videos. I believe a book or knowledge only becomes truly impactful when that knowledge is applied, and unless you have photographic memory, it's essential to keep your focus narrow and really imbibe what you're reading before spreading yourself out too thinly. And that correlates rather closely to being profitable as a trader, because there was a time where I was almost losing myself listening to different people operating in different markets with different strategies. It wasn't until I narrowed my focus that things began to really take off. So whilst I've had my best year on Betfair in 2025, it's been a progress of figuring out what I can stick to and pouring all my energy into figuring out what works and what doesn't. And even when you do get a taste for some of that green, it's a never-ending journey, at least for a manual trader like me who's battling the psychological part while trying to perfect your execution. And to those who followed me long enough on social media will remember when I used to post myself gleefully, enthusiastically scalping 5s and 10s out of the winter Australian racing at 2 a.m. in the morning. And whilst I've come a long way since then, nothing's happened overnight. When I started trading, I turned profitable within a few months. And one of the most lucrative strategies that I deployed was on horse racing, where I would scalp pre-off around the resistance points, which were very stable until a few years ago when bots started running riot and liquidity dried up. Markets caught up, as they usually do, and there were many wasted years after that, where I was firing aimlessly into markets where I didn't know what I was doing. And worse yet, I wasn't mindful of what was going wrong because I wasn't taking notes. So for example, if I was trading racing in play, I developed an edge for spotting front runners, which I still use to this day. But my execution was poor because I would let trades run for too long, or I'd overstake amongst other things. And whilst I had a high hit rate, I wasn't turning a profit. I was spinning my wheels for nothing because my execution was poor. Another thing I would do is I would trade every single race on every race card on the day. And I would trade them all the same, whether it was a 5 furlong sprint or an Irish national hunts race. There was no nuance for staking or timing or any consideration for any of the variables that influence a race. There is nothing more precious than your time, and burnout's a very real phenomenon in trading. Most people just don't have the time to turn their fortunes around like I did. Once you get into a set of destructive habits, it's improbable that you're going to overcome them. It's not until you have an actual written plan that tangible progress is possible. And it wasn't until I did that when my fortunes began to change. And now, to this day, I know well in advance when I'm trading. I know what I'm trading. I know what tracks to avoid, which horses to look out for, or which cricket grounds where I'm likely to back the batting team, when I'm going to go over or unders on the run lines, what I'm staking, how to split my stakes, etc. And after having done things this way, and after having traded the same calendar for many years now, I can now look back at previous years and I can forecast to a high degree of accuracy how much I'm going to make if things go as they're expected, or better or worse. And whilst there's never been a magical year or a standout game-changing win, things have consistently trended in the right direction for the last 4 years. Too many budding traders often look for answers in the wrong places, and I suspect that happens because there's nothing sexy about the truth around turning profitable. And because most people are looking for shortcuts, they jump from one strategy to another. They spread their efforts thin and eventually they just give up because they didn't get those fast results. And I totally get it. I understand the lure of fast profits as well as anyone, because there was a time when I had the wrong idea about money as well. I also saw trading as a fast road to riches once upon a time. The reality is that a life-changing win is not possible in trading without taking a substantial amount of risk, which could wipe you out to zero. You've probably heard the quote about how overnight success is the product of years of hard work or unseen effort. And whilst that sentiment may be true in, say, show business or social media or sport, it's not the same way in trading. Yes, it's possible to go viral overnight and get millions of followers over one clip. Yes, it's possible to create overnight buzz around your business, but it's a very different thing altogether trying to turn, say, £10,000 into £250,000 by next month, despite having decades of experience behind you. And that's because with trading, there's a very tangible consequence to your failure. You have to bear the risk of losing most, if not all of that money in order to make that kind of return. There's virtually no downside to posting a video on social media that flops. And for every overnight success story you hear about in trading or gambling circles is nearly always a product of extreme luck. If you win quickly overnight, then you are not equipped to deal with losses, and it's really no wonder why most people who get rich overnight end up inevitably giving it all back. And that leaves scar tissue that most people cannot come back from. Believe me, if you've spent enough time reading through X or Reddit, there is ample amounts of horror stories of people who've squandered millions in profits in the space of days or weeks. So whilst 2025 was a good year and the best yet for me, on closer inspection, across over 2,000 markets traded, my average profits per market compared to 2024 was barely a difference of £10. At face value, there's nothing sensational about that at all. There was no jackpot trade. There was no fortune accumulated over any weekend. But more importantly, there was no disaster. And not losing what you make is the most important part of protecting your mental psyche. There's nothing more stressful or anxiety inducing than constantly feeling like you could lose everything by tomorrow. Nothing burns you out faster than reckless roller coaster results. So my message isn't to be average, not even above average. You should aim as high as possible, and most people have no problem doing that with their New Year's resolutions, because it's not lofty goals that hinders progress. The reason why most people fall off, and because they have no plan of action, by the time we get to Q3 or Q4, shortcuts become very enticing. So speaking personally, it doesn't matter how high I aim, I'm not going to make £1 million in 2026. Not because I don't want it, but for one, I don't have the capital to get there. So I would have to substantially increase my appetite for risk to even have a chance of doing that. So given my strike rate of my trades and my ROI and the nature of variance, it would just be a matter of time before I wipe myself back to zero. It will only take a small dry patch for me to do that. Not to mention the fact that I've never dealt with stakes anywhere near big enough in order to make £1 million. So even if someone staked me, my decision making would be heavily impaired by that level of money. In other words, I have far more chance of losing everything than making £1 million at this stage, and that's quite okay. I don't try to fight it. Better yet, I try to be as honest as possible with myself. Nothing forces humility more than losing a lot of money, which I've done several times in the past. So I operate with the urgency that my ability allows me to do so. And thus far, my results have improved year upon year. I don't need to fix what's not broken, and for as long as I continue to put one foot in front of the other, I'll always be taking steps closer to my goal. Maybe you are more talented than me, and maybe you do have access to that sort of capital. And if that's the case, go for it. But if you did, you wouldn't be listening to me. I can only speak from the place that I'm at, and as someone who's never had a losing year on Betfair, as someone who's been around a long time, has tried every shortcut, has been hindered by bad habits, lost it all and built myself back up, I have the foresight to know that to build slowly is to build correctly. And as you build momentum under the laws of compounding, it will progress a lot quicker than you can imagine. But the beginning is always slow. My advice to you is to at least draft a plan that's reasonable enough for you to stick with consistently. Everyone's trigger points, talent, work ethic, appetite for risk differs from individual to individual. Trading is a very solo endeavor, so you can't afford to judge yourself against others. You need to figure out what works for you and what you can stick with. A plan takes all the guesswork away. A plan gives you a tangible measuring stick to measure your progress against. It's really that simple. And I promise you that you will never be, or at least never should be, disappointed if you make consistent progress, no matter how small. Most people massively overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what they can achieve with year-on-year progress. You will stop spinning your wheels needlessly and start to bear real fruit for your efforts if you just stick with a plan that's reasonable. New Year's resolutions fizzle out fast and most settle for mediocrity by the end of Q1. Not because their goals weren't big enough, but because they had no plan of action to get there. So just make a plan, stick with it, and the results take care of themselves. That's my message and advice to you. And that's what it always will be every year. So I do hope you listened this time. I hope you do follow and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.